In today's video, we're gonna continue working on the 328i E90 by removing the N51 SULEV engine and replacing it with an N52. So let's get into it on Rebuild Revival. We're gonna be removing the engine and subframe through the bottom. So a few things that we need to remove first is the exhaust, a few of the heat shields, the drive shaft. We'll disconnect all of the cooling lines and drain the coolant. We'll have to unbolt the steering shaft from the rack, unbolt the top of the struts, unbolt the subframe and transmission cross member, make sure everything is disconnected from the top, and then we should be able to lower the engine, subframe, and tranny all in one. So first we're just going to disconnect the brand new battery we just put in here. Then I'll start disconnecting some of the coolant hoses and drain most of the coolant. Next we can remove the exhaust. Then these two heat shields and the drive shaft. Now we'll start on the top of the engine by removing the strut brace, air filter housing, air ram, intake boot, and eventually the intake manifold, which has a lot of connectors on the bottom that took me quite some time to remove. Now I'll disconnect the entire harness from the engine and label everything as I go along. The more detailed you are with labeling, the easier the installation process will be later on. All right, now I'm working back under the car, disconnecting a couple more coolant hoses. All right, so I'm trying to disconnect these power steering lines from the cooler because the cooler is gonna stay in the car and the pump is gonna go with the subframe.
Oh, got one.
Got one. Now that next one is right above it.
Yep, there it is.
Now I'll remove this reinforcement bar, disconnect the O2 sensors and label them, disconnect the shifter cable, the main transmission harness, and this ground strap going from the engine to the body. Some of the last connectors I need to remove are going to the water pump. There is one with a bolt here, a connector there, and another connector over here at the thermostat housing.
Got it.
There it is. Okay, that's loose. I think that's one of the last connectors. Now we can remove the front wheels and disconnect the calipers. I'm going to evacuate the refrigerant out of the AC system as it's a little difficult to disconnect the compressor from the engine while the engine is still installed. I think we're discharged. All right, now that we've evacuated the AC system, we can disconnect these two AC lines that are connected to the compressor. So I'm actually only going to disconnect one from here and then the other one from over by the firewall. There we go. Now I'll unbolt the top of the struts from the strut towers. The last piece to the puzzle, I think, is this ground strap right here. So I just got to unbolt it from right there and we should drop the engine out. All right guys, so this is how we're gonna do it. I'm just gonna use this cart and I will set the car down on top of this and then I will remove the subframe bolts, which there's one there, one here, and then one back here. So 3 on each side and then the tranny mount in the back. As I lift the car up, I'll watch and disconnect anything that is still attached. All right, so the engine, tranny, and subframe are all out. Whew, that took some work. Now I'll bring in the replacement engine and prepare to swap over a bunch of parts from this one. So we've got our replacement engine here. This is actually an N52. It's pretty much the same engine, but it does have a little bit more compression and less emission stuff as it sits, but we can swap all of that stuff off of the N51 and this should work fine. So some of the things we're going to be swapping are the injectors and fuel rail, the intake manifold off the N51, the secondary air system, because this actually has a block off plate where the secondary air would originally go on the N51. This is where it bolts to. So we'll be swapping that over. Cats and exhaust. And then some parts like this alternator was actually replaced in 2018. So I'll be swapping this over. This pulley on the power steering pump is broken. The AC compressor on this one has the stop leak dye in it. So there was obviously an issue with the AC system on this N52 car. So I'll probably swap over the compressor from the N51. But before we swap any parts over, I am going to be cleaning both of these engines up because some of the parts that I use off of this one, I want to clean before I even put them over there. And I want to clean this engine before I swap anything onto it. We're also going to clean the engine bay while the engine is out. You can see like this frame rail is caked with probably power steering fluid. And we're just gonna give it a light clean while the engine's out so it's easier to clean. And then we'll also be removing this engine off of the subframe before we clean the subframe, because this subframe is very dirty too. Got some caked on oil there, and all in here is just caked with oil. So it'll be easier to clean once we remove this engine off of it. Okay, so I already started covering up some stuff, as you can see, but I wanted to get some of these little rubber stoppers to plug up holes like here, here, and any smaller holes like that that I can just stick one of these in. So let's go around and continue covering up some stuff in here that we don't want to get water and soap in. Like these power steering cooler lines right here, perfect example. So we can just pop these in there, just like that. All right, so now we're gonna take the engine and tranny off of the subframe. So I'm just gonna disconnect it here at the motor mount and on the other side as well. I think we need to disconnect this power steering line and then the motor mount over here, and we should be good. So let's do that. Right, we're pretty much ready to start cleaning. We've got our containment set up down on the ground, and then I just threw up some plastic to kind of keep all of the grease and stuff from splattering all over my toolboxes and my workbench and all of this stuff over here. So I just need to go around and plug up some stuff, some power steering lines, oil lines, anywhere that I don't want water to get into. First, we'll just rinse it off with the pressure washer. Hit it with the degreaser. Rinse it off with the pressure washer again. Hit it with the degreaser one more time. Hit a couple of the heavy spots with some brushes. And a final rinse with the pressure washer. And then blow everything off with compressed air. So here are some before shots of the original N51. The replacement N52. The subframe. And the belly pan. Ooh, that was a lot of work, but check out how clean these things got. Now this is the original N51, which we're not really worried about, but maybe I'll do something with it in the future, who knows. So I wanted to go ahead and clean that up, and plus we are gonna be taking some parts, so I wanted to clean those up as well. But this thing was just caked with oil, check it out. Did the tranny as well. And then here is the replacement N52, which wasn't too dirty to begin with, but it's definitely really clean now. Check out the front of that thing. It's like brand new. And the subframe. This thing was caked with oil and grease. Now it's looking fresh. And the belly pan. This thing had like 2 inches of grease on it. So now we're gonna move the N52 over a little bit. We'll move the subframe so we can drop the car down a little bit, and we'll do the engine bay. I'm going to cover this area because I have all of the cowling removed. And I'll just spray it down with the engine degreaser. Hit a couple of the heavy spots with some brushes. Rinse everything down with the pressure washer. And then blow everything off with compressed air. All right, so we've got the clean N52 sitting right here. And now I'm going to remove some of the components and accessories that I won't be reusing from this engine, as well as replacing some seals and gaskets that I've got right here. We've got the oil pan, valve cover, oil filter housing, exhaust, intake, Vanos, and I've got some O-rings over here for wherever I may need one. I'll unplug the fuel injector harness and then remove the fuel rail with injectors. Now I'll continue removing the rest of this harness off of the engine. Remove this coolant hose, the broken power steering pump pulley, the Valvetronic motor, and the valve cover. All right guys, here is the valve cover gasket, and you can see it was put on with some silicone or gasket maker, and it wasn't leaking. Would you take this off or would you leave it? And even these ones as well. I think I will still pull them, but man, it's really stuck on there. Look at that. All right, let's pull this off. After removing the gasket, I'll carefully use a fresh razor blade to remove any of the silicone or RTV that's left over. Then I'll wipe it down with some carb cleaner. All right, now let's clean up the valve cover before we put the new seals on. So we'll just pop all of these out. We'll pop the Valvetronic sensor and motor seals out. I'm gonna go clean this up really quick. All right, now we've cleaned up the top side. I just did a quick little wash on it. Now I'll clean up the inside of the valve cover and the gasket mating surface with some carb cleaner and a brush. Just gonna wipe it out a little bit more with what little carb cleaner I have left. Now I'll pop the new seals into place. Okay, now we could go in with our new valve cover gaskets. So the other one had RTV silicone on it, but there's no need for that. They probably just did that as an extra precaution. But these should just go in dry. Now we'll go back in with our spark plug tubes. Go on with the valve cover. Now we can put the Valvetronic motor back in. All right, now we're gonna do the oil filter housing gaskets. So there's just 1, 2, 3 coming in from the backside here. I'll just pull the old gasket off and clean everything off really good with some carb cleaner and a brush. Since I've got the new filter, I'm just gonna put it in now, along with the little seals that it comes with. This one. So we've got this one. And this one here. There we go. Okay, now we'll go in with the new gasket. All right, now let's get it back on the car. Okay, while we've got this off, I'm gonna take this alternator off too. I think there's only one bolt holding it in. Yeah, it looks like someone was trying to get this alternator off and strip this bolt or something, and they tried to cut a slit in it for a flathead. So let's see if we can get that off. I'm gonna give it a little bit of heat. Okay, I'm not sure if I recorded that, but I did get the alternator off. Here's that broken bolt. It was already broken before I got to it, or stripped. So we were able to get that out. Now let's go get the one off the N51 and we'll put it on here. We'll just do a little cleanup while we're here. Why not? I'm gonna hit this surface right now too before I get the alternator on there. Now the oil filter housing. All right, before I get any more components onto this N52, I want to rotate it and do the oil pan gasket, but I'm gonna drain the oil first because I think it's still full. There we go. Oh no. Okay, well, as you can see, this thing has a lot of this flakiness, and it's not metallic. It's some sort of coating that comes off on the inside of the engine. I'm gonna pull the windage tray off and the pickup tube so I can give you guys a better look. All right, guys, check this stuff out. That is crazy. It looks like it's almost a coating coming off of the inside of the engine. You can kind of see it there. Okay, after looking into it a little bit, it seems to be this stuff here is just oil sludge and carbon buildup that attached itself to the inside of the block in the crankcase, and then one of the owners probably used some type of motor flush or something like that that dislodged it from the walls. Like you can see here how it's kind of like peeling off of the crankcase. So I need to flush all of this stuff out of there, and how I'm going to do that is with diesel. I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but this is how I'm going to do it. So I'm going to flip the engine over, spray the diesel from the bottom, and use a few different brushes to kind of get up in there and loosen all of that stuff up. And then once I get this engine together, I'll do a quick oil change after I start the car. So I'll run it for, I don't know, 30 minutes or so just here in the shop, and then I'll do an oil change and hopefully it should be good. So let's get this engine rotated over and start cleaning all of that stuff out. Okay, so this is how I've got the engine. It's kind of tilted a little bit this way so I have good access from this side. I've got a drain pan under here. This is my diesel. I put a little bit of tranny fluid in there as well just to kind of thicken it up, and maybe some of the detergents in the tranny fluid will help a little bit. I think this is gonna work fine. There may be better ways to do it, but this is how I'm gonna do it, and we'll see the results in the end. So let's go ahead and start cleaning. I've also got a couple of different brushes we're gonna use to try and get some of that stuff out of there. All right, guys, check this out. The crankcase used to have flaky stuff all over it. It's all clean now. There is a little bit that like hasn't started flaking off yet right there, but I think we're gonna be good with that. And then here is the oil pan, super clean, windage tray. The oil pickup, I got the screen all cleaned out. And this is some of what came out of there, as well as all of this. Now this is probably 80% of what was in there. I already kind of wiped and threw some of it away, but check all of that out. Crazy. That could clog your oil pump in a heartbeat. So now we're good to put the oil pan back on with the new gasket. I just want to clean up the surface a little bit more. There's a little bit of gasket material still left on here. So we'll just spray it down with some carb cleaner and use a fresh razor blade to gently scrape any of the gasket material off. And then I'll blow out the bolt holes with some compressed air. So now we'll go back in with the windage tray. So we'll go back in with the pickup tube. And then we'll go on with the new gasket dry and reinstall the oil pan. Okay, now I'm gonna pull the Vanos solenoids. There's just 2 bolts here, and then there are a couple of O-rings inside. And I'm gonna pull the cam position sensors and replace the seals on those as well. Here are the Vanos solenoids. I do have new seals for these. I thought I would have the right size O-ring for the cam position sensors in this little kit, but I don't. This one's too big and the other ones are too small. So I'm just gonna clean these ones up and put them back in, but I will clean out the Vanos solenoids and then put the new seals on. So let's get these cleaned up. I'm just going to spray them with some carb cleaner because there are screens in there somewhere. I'll blow them out a little bit. This O-ring might go all the way up. I'm not sure. I'll have to check on the engine. All right, so I'm also going to clean up where the solenoids go and where the cam position sensors go. Okay, I'm also going to pull this crank position sensor and see what the seal looks like on that. I probably don't have the right O-ring, but maybe I do. So let's pull this and see. Oh, that was loose. Yeah, I think it's that same size. Huh, what was that? All right, just clean this one up like the others. Now we'll pop it back in. I put a little Loctite on this one because it's so deep in here. You know, you have to probably pull the whole intake manifold off, so I don't want it coming loose. It was already loose. I don't know if the guy I bought this engine from loosened it, but I didn't. All right, now I need to start swapping over some more parts off of the N51. So we're gonna do the exhaust manifold, some of these coolant lines. This is an AC line that needs to go. The power steering pump pulley needs to go. Transmission cooler or heat exchanger, whatever you want to call that. The starter needs to go. The power steering reservoir needs to go. Fuel rail and injectors need to go. And I think that's it. So yeah, we're just gonna start pulling a bunch of stuff off of this N51 so we can put it over on the N52. We'll start with the exhaust manifolds. I need to take this hose because on the N52, this sensor is not there. So we're gonna take this hose. Next, we'll pull this AC line, the power steering pump pulley, the transmission cooler lines, the power steering fluid reservoir, the starter, the fuel rail with injectors. All right, now I'm gonna remove the transmission, so we'll just remove all the bell housing bolts around the outside. So if you rotate the engine, there is a spot around the bottom that you can line up and get each torque converter bolt. The N52 is missing this motor mount bracket, so we'll swap it as well. Now we'll just install all of those parts we removed onto the N52. We'll put new gaskets on the exhaust manifolds before installing them. I'll remove this motor mount bracket as it's in the way to get the front exhaust manifold on. Oh, that bolt is snapped off. That's a motor mount bolt. Dang, okay, well let's do a center punch and use a left-handed drill bit, see if we can get that out. that sucked. Oh, it's coming already. Nice having a spare parts engine. Since all of the accessories on this N52 seem to be in better shape, I wanted to try and reuse this compressor even though it had the dye in it. So I tried to flush it out with some alcohol. I filled it up with alcohol, turned the engine over a few times, rotated the pulley. But after messing with it for about an hour, I still couldn't get all of the dye out, so I decided to just swap over the compressor anyways. Now I'll install the power steering pump pulley, and yes, I did put it on backwards, but I did fix it later on. Now we'll go back on with this AC line. And this coolant hose with the sensor that the N52 didn't have. We're getting really close to getting the N52 in the car. I just need to install the flex plate, torque converter, transmission, and these cooler lines. Then we'll get the engine back on the subframe. There's a dowel pin here to line it up. All right, and I did put Loctite on the bolts. Now I'll install the torque converter onto the transmission, and I'll just rotate it a few times to make sure it's seated all the way. Okay, and I'm gonna go around and torque all of those as well once I get the torque converter bolts on. So let's lift this up. All right, so now we're just gonna turn the engine over by hand a little bit, and then we probably need to turn the torque converter. There it is. Hey, I think we're right on the money right there. Now I'll install this wiring harness clip that utilizes two bell housing bolts. All right, now I need to get the tranny lines and heat exchanger or tranny cooler back on. They mount here to the pan, and then one bolt back over there for this bracket. I did put new O-rings on. They were a little bit bigger than, or a little bit thicker than what was there, so hopefully that will be all right. Let's get those on. All right, I'm about to set this thing down on the subframe. We are on. There's that motor mount. And that motor mount. So let's get these bolted up, and then we can take off the engine hoist. Now I'll roll the engine, tranny, and subframe into place and connect a few more lines and hoses, like this power steering line. There we go. This coolant hose. This other coolant hose. And I'll install the fuel rail with injectors. Now we can lower the car onto the engine assembly, making sure everything is clear and out of the way. Okay, now that the subframe is lined up, we can go ahead and bolt it in and install the transmission crossmember. All right guys, the N52 is now bolted in. I've got the subframe bolts and the tranny mount all bolted in, so it's mounted. Now we just need to start hooking up the harness, all of the hoses, the lines, that steering shaft I need to bolt in down there. Just go around and start hooking everything back up. We're gonna start up here on the top and then work our way down. I'm also installing a new drive belt. I wish I would have done this with the engine out, but I just forgot. Once you get the majority of the harness hooked back up, you can go ahead and install the intake manifold. This is kind of difficult even though I did just remove it. One thing that did make it easier was to remove the studs that bolt the intake manifold to the head. Alright guys, check out this air filter housing. I was about to install it back in the car and I wanted to replace the filter. I got a new filter and it's a pretty dumb design because you have to unscrew the filter housing with like a T30. So kind of a dumb design. You can't just unclip it and replace the filter. You have to remove like 5 T30s. So kind of a dumb design here. And then it's also got this after filter that you cannot replace right before the mass airflow. So I think if you ever needed to replace this, you have to replace the whole housing or at least this half of it. So I don't know, kind of a dumb design, BMW. Now we'll start putting the intake back together, starting with this intake boot and air filter housing. Now I can bolt up the struts. The secondary air valve and hose can now be installed. All right guys, I think we're pretty good up here on top. Pretty much everything is connected. There is one coolant hose right here that I'm not sure what it goes to, but I think I'll be able to find out when I get down underneath. So let's go ahead and lift the car up and start connecting everything down there. This is the coolant hose I was talking about. It connects to the bottom of the radiator. Here are the connectors that go to the water pump and thermostat housing. Now I'll reconnect the downstream O2 sensors. This ground strap. The main transmission harness, and the shifter cable. Then we can install the drive shaft, heat shields, and exhaust. I didn't tighten the oil drain plug down all the way, so I'll pull it out, clean up the surface, and then snug it down. I'll reinstall this lower support brace, then finally reinstall the front brake calipers and wheels and tires, which I rotated from the rear. Now I need to fill the cooling system with coolant. I like using this vacuum bleeder because it makes sure all of the air is out of the system. Okay, this has stayed at -25 for a very long time now. I had to go get distilled water, but I've got half and half G48 blue coolant And distilled water in here. I've got 2 gallons. So we're gonna go in with this. We'll open the valve. Once the vacuum gauge reaches 0, the system is full. Okay. All right, now let's go in with oil. And like I said, I'm gonna use some of this cheaper stuff. I mean, it's still full synthetic. 540, and I've got Mobil 1 040 to put in after. I think this takes 6 quarts. All right, now we'll fill our power steering fluid. I think it takes a little less than a liter, so hopefully I don't need any more than this because this is all I have. And we'll have to top this off after we run it, which is fine. All right, so now we need to remove the fuel pump fuse. This is the fuse panel behind the glove box, and it's this 20 amp number 70. All right, so we're gonna turn it over to build some oil pressure. I pulled the fuse for the fuel pump, and I don't even have the coils hooked up yet. So it's not gonna start, but it will crank over a few times. So let's crank it over a few times and build some fuel pressure. Actually, I'm gonna go ahead and put the coils in now. So once we do build oil pressure, I can start it. All right, now we'll reconnect the battery. And now we'll crank it over a few times. All right, now we'll reinstall the fuel pump fuse. Now we'll actually try and start the car. This fuel fitting was leaking, so I just need to tighten it up really quick. Those are the new gaskets for the exhaust, and that's the power steering pump making a lot of noise. No big deal, it sounds good. We'll bleed the power steering system by turning the steering wheel back and forth from stop to stop multiple times until the whining noise stops. Then we'll top off the reservoir with more power steering fluid. I'm going to rev it up a few times just to get the blood flowing. Alright guys, it looks like the N52 is running how it should, so we're going to end this video here. There is still a lot left to do on this E90 project. We need to get it out on the road, make sure everything is functioning properly, as well as address some of the cosmetic issues that it has, but we'll be getting to all of that in future videos. So thank you all for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you all in the next video.